Today we're talking about an ancient evil that has sought to unleash its unholy wrath upon the earth for eons and untold millennia. A being who has possessed the most powerful of chaos magic users in the Marvel Universe, a being named Chthon. Let's talk about him. Thanks for watching JLS Comics. Hit that subscribe button so you can keep up with all of our weekly content, and with that out of the way, let's jump right into this story. And this story begins in the earliest days of Marvel's planet Earth, billions of years ago, in the era where Earth was still forming and cooling. And in that time period, a sentient being emerged named the Demiurge that basically became the embodiment of the potential for life to grow. And so with this in mind, Demiurge seeded the planet with fragments of its own self. And from that, the first beings emerged, the Elder Gods, Gaia, who took care of the earth, Ashtar, who would later birth Agamotto, and with her progeny along with Hogoth form a group called the Vishanti, and who authored the Book of Vishanti. Another elder god named Set was the serpent god, one of the first murderers, and from this act, he and his brother Chthon developed into demons. His name is ostensibly derived from Greek mythology and a word meaning underground, albeit with a slightly different pronunciation than Marvel's iteration. Chthon studied and mastered black magic and the dark arts and learned about various mystical forces across the cosmos, mastering them all. After their sister Gaia gave birth to the Demogorge, and they feared for their lives because the Demogorge was taking it upon itself to eat the other gods, Chthon teamed up with Set to take on the God Eater, but failed. Chthon, considered by this time to be the most powerful and the greatest of the great old ones, the old gods, traveled to what would later be Wundagore Mountain in Transia and found some caverns below the mountain that would become the Dark Hold. Chthon wrote and inscribed his knowledge on the cavern walls and on indestructible parchment his brother's flesh, including an anti-Demogorge spell. These arcane entries would later be bound into an unholy tome full of forbidden spells and dark magic called the Darkhold. According to the Darkholder's cult, this was done by an Arthurian-era sorceress named Morgan Le Fay. But little did they know that even this was not an original, it was a copy to record his works, a true first edition. The other gods filled the book with wards against him, and then they copied the pages to stone and then to parchments, hiding the first print of the Darkhold away forever, ensuring only copies and copies of copies would pass through hands, its true power never fully being wielded. This Darkhold book would also serve as Chthon's bridge from his new home to this world. And with that completed, Chthon fled. Some say he was banished to a dimension he created called Clay, the other realm, also known as the Flickering Realm. He managed to escape the deadly appetite of Demogorge, but he became trapped in his own realm, and though he couldn't escape, he completely controlled everything within, down to the fabric of other realms' reality itself. He was able to project power out to other planes of existence, but only when a mystic calls upon him to do so via the Darkhold, and the trade-off is that their soul then becomes Chthon's. In other realm, Chthon created a race of demons called the Nagari, and other races like goblins, harpies, night gaunts, ape men, man-bats, and even the wolfmen. Varkalok, one of the wolf lords, would later mate with the granddaughter of Set and produce both the Fenris wolf and the Midgard serpent as spawns. To counter those experimental races, Ashtar created the birdmen of Akamat, led by one Varuna. But after Chthon lied to Varuna, whispering aspersions in Varuna's ear, Varuna suddenly became suspicious of those lower races like Homo sapiens, and so to balance that out, Ashtar gathered his forces and took a demon foursome and made them into the servants of justice. And then, sometime around 10,000 years ago, a group of sorcerers, which also included Varney and Lilith from Atlantis, traveled to Transia and discovered the copy of the Darkhold that was within. These people formed a cult called the Darkholders and used its power as their own, corrupting them until they became the first vampires. In the Copper Age, 5 warriors called the Darkhold Defenders managed to push back one of Chthon's attempts to cross dimensional barriers, and they defeated him, but going to Other Realm made them go insane, and they were later turned into statues, to stone. From there, the Darkhold passed down through centuries and was used by various wizards, warlocks, witches, and sorcerers. In Egypt of antiquity, a sorcerer named Hekanut was attempting to gather up the cornerstone of creation, powerful mystical artifacts, which included the Sword of Bone made by Ashtar, the Serpent Crown made by Set, the Ebon Rose made by Gaia, and the Darkhold made by Chthon. Chthon worked with an Egyptian god of darkness named Keku to tempt Hekanut and bend him to his will. This was a big win for Chthon because Hekanut was something of a liaison between the eightfold that they were part of. He had Heka go after the Sword of Bone, but Magic, Ilyana Rasputin, who traveled on the time stream, was the one to stop him that time. In the 1700s, Morgan Le Fay took over leadership of the Darkholders cult. They called forth Chthon in an attempt to control him and his dark power, but Chthon proved too powerful for even them. The tide turned in their favor and they began to push him back, but they weren't powerful enough to send him back to his realm, and so they did the next best thing. They bound him permanently to a location, not just the book, and that location was where the Darkhold was in the cavern caverns, Wundagore Mountain. Le Fay's lover Magnus was horrified by the evil he'd seen, so he left Morgan Le Fay and stole the Darkhold book and hid it so no one with evil intentions could find it, and let evil loose on the world again. It was later during the waning days of the Age of Camelot that a mystic named Mordred traveled to the Tower of the Darkhold at Wundagore Mountain with his love, Lady Janice. He wanted to find the power within and use it to stop an evil imposter, Merlin the Wizard, so he wanted to use it for a noble purpose. Chthon, here called the Other, wanted to collect Mordred's soul, but he refused. When Janice came in, Chthon saw her, and Mordred ended up sacrificing his own soul to Chthon in order to save Lady Janice. And so, without his soul, Mordred would fall asleep in a deep slumber, a hibernation-like coma that lasted for centuries. The real Merlin continued to fight back against Chthon with help from a guy named Brendan. They managed to beat back the evil, and they then took the Darkhold book itself and scattered the pages all over the globe in order to reduce its power and decentralize it so that if someone found one entry, they wouldn't have all of it. Being that the book and the pages were indestructible, this was the next best thing. However, a monk named Alfric began to worship Chthon and sought to bring the pages back together to rebind them into a new Darkhold. And unfortunately, he was successful. Alfric was then burned at the stake with his reconstituted book, and they burned. Alfric perished, but the book was able to reform itself, though it wound up unbound in scroll form. The next year, Paolo Montesi bound the book back together, and called it the Book of Sins. It was Montesi who found a spell in the book that could fight back against the vampires, and this entry in the Darkhold would later on become known as the Montesi Formula. Then Chthon teamed up with Sagbada, also known as Baron Samedi, a god whose sister is Damballa and is part of the African Vodou pantheon, and they teamed up. They both empowered another Loa, the Loa of Lightning, to cast a spell in order to create an army of mindless servants. Those servants they created were the first zombies. In turn, the other Loa asked Gaia to make them a warrior to fight these new zombies, here called Zevembis, and so a Lord of Loa was created, which became a mantle that was passed down, ultimately finding its way to Brother Voodoo, now called Dr. Voodoo. In the early part of the 20th century, a man named Herbert Wyndham traveled to Transia and the foot of Wundagore Mountain, and there he created his new laboratory, along with his friend and partner Jonathan Drew, the father of Jessica Drew, who would much later become Spider-Woman. Herbert slowly transformed into the High Evolutionary, and through science and genetic manipulation, he created his own race of anthropomorphic servants he called the Ani-Men. In 1932, Chthon, trapped in the mountain, laughed while High Evolutionary and Drew argued. Drew was trying to convince Herbert that he was possessed by Magnus, a servant sorcerer to Morgan Le Fay, who'd studied the Darkhold along with Morgan, and that if Herbert didn't leave Wundagore Mountain, their activity would reawaken the demon itself. When High Evolutionary scoffed at this, fancying himself a man of science, Chthon chortled from deep within Wundagore Mountain. A neighbor of Herbert's was Gregor Rusov, a man cursed with lycanthropy, and who was Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night's father, came into possession of the Darkhold. When he read a certain entry in the book, Gregor became cursed with lycanthropy, and on certain nights each month he would turn into a werewolf. It was around this time that another sorcerer named Taboo found the Darkhold as well, and Taboo kept it for himself. Over 2 decades later, it was 1958, Gregor Rusov cast a spell called the Spell of Ascension in hopes of freeing Chthon from his imprisonment in the mountain, and by doing so he hoped Chthon would help free himself of his werewolf curse as a sort of quid pro quo type arrangement. Chthon rose up from the depths and attacked High Evolutionary and his Knights of Wundagore. That's when the spirit of Magnus, who was inside of Jonathan Drew still, left his body and passed on to Gregor Rusov. The now possessed Rusov cast a spell of binding in order to send Chthon back into the bowels of his mountain cage. Chthon lashed out at Rusov as this was happening, and one of his blasts struck a baby that had been born on Wundagore Mountain that night. That baby was Wanda Maximoff, who would grow up to become the Scarlet Witch. Chthon had sensed in this baby an innate ability to manipulate chaos magic, and so he wanted to mark her as a vessel for him to possibly possess in the future. This was Chthon's dark blessing on this child. Then this witch queen of the gypsies named Lilia Calderu, who'd been charged with keeping the Book of Cagliostro and was now under the thrall of Set Serpentcrown, tried to recruit young Wanda Maximoff into their group. So Chthon reached out to Taboo, who was in possession of the Darkhold, and had him stop Lilia's group so Chthon could protect his vessel Wanda. Taboo then teamed up with Damballa to confront Caldero's group, and in that fight, Wanda's chaos magic manifested for the first time ever, creating a bridge for Chthon to contact them from elsewhere. Chthon was able to defeat them and banish the Serpent Crown and sent Damballa back to Haiti, protecting Wanda. He also let those present know that just by their mere presence there meant that later on they would have children who were both blessed and cursed with occult powers. Then a descendant of Paolo Montesi named Vittorio Montesi had received the book and was charged with protecting the book. When he discovered he was sterile, he became desperate, and so he read from the book, casting the spell of fertility. This allowed his wife to be pregnant, but the father was Chthon and not Vittorio. This baby would be named Victoria Montesi. Victoria would later form the Darkhold Redeemers and aid the Midnight Suns against Lilith, the mother of demons. In the present day, a pair of archaeologists awakened Mordred the Mystic after decades of slumber, but he was unwittingly under the possession of Chthon. Chthon would make Mordred capture Scarlet Witch, and he performed a ritual on her, allowing her to become his vessel on Earth. He appeared before Wanda's brother Quicksilver and one of High Evolutionary's creations named Bova, and he told them both to leave or they would be killed. The possessed Mordred the Mystic battled with the Avengers, and then the possessed Scarlet Witch took on the Avengers herself, capturing them all. They were put inside a mystical circle for a ritual that would fully summon Chthon to Earth. But before the ritual could be completed, Hank McCoy, the Beast, garbed in Knights of Wundagore attire, showed up and snatched the Darkhold, which ended up freeing the Avengers. The Avengers were able to then defeat Chthon and free Scarlet Witch of his evil possession. They then trapped the essence of Chthon inside a doll that Django Maximoff had made in the likeness of Wanda. Quicksilver threw the doll down the mountain, and then Scarlet Witch used her powers to make an avalanche, bringing the mountain down upon itself and upon the doll, trapping Chthon in his dimension once more. Ophelia Sarkeesian, who was the Viper, and Madame Hydra got the Serpent Crown, and reformed the Serpent Squad, which then brought her into contention with Jessica Drew, the Spider-Woman. Viper was then under the control of Morgan Le Fay, who made Viper believe she was actually Spider-Woman's mother. So when the two met up, Spider-Woman was sent to Chthon's domain and wound up before the Elder God himself. Chthon wanted to use her now to try to get to Earth, and it would have worked too if it wasn't for a meddling Viper. She still thought Jessica was her daughter, so she freed her and closed the portal to Chthon's realm. Doctor Strange then used the Montesi formula in the Darkhold to destroy all vampires after the Lord of Vampires, Dracula himself, attacked. They defeated him, and Strange was able to break free of the Darkhold's power, narrowly avoiding having Chthon take his soul from him. And in Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme, the dread Dormammu attempted to cast all of Earth into darkness by channeling the Cauldron of Chthon for a spell. We also learned in Darkhold from the pages of the Book of Sins that there's a being called the Darkhold Dwarf, the Hand of Chthon, who is in possession of lost pages of the Darkhold. And this dwarf likes to send the pages to unsuspecting victims in black envelopes in order to cause chaos on Earth on behalf of Chthon, a djinn-like dwarf who epitomizes the be careful what you wish for sentiment. The leader of the Darkholders cult, named Randolph de Guzman, was trying to collect the pages, and so he teamed up with Lilith to kill Vicky Montesi. Scarlet Witch then sensed that Chthon was near, and for a moment she reverted back to her Chthon-controlled state. In Darkhold 9, Louise Hastings had another page with the wishing spell on it. She ended up reading it and summoned Chthon, but instead of giving in, Louise told the Elder God that she was tempted to wish her daughter back to life, but she wouldn't give in to the temptation. Louise's grandson tried to use the Darkhold power, but he was mystical too, and this kept Chthon from attacking his soul. He wasn't done though, and read it again and summoned Chthon, and he and Vicky were able to force the Elder God to tell them about the Demogorge page. Randolph de Guzman had a daughter named Diabolique, who was secretly murdering Darkholders and using them to create a monster, an energy battery for herself that she called Playmate. After de Guzman walked in and her killing her own mother, she promised him a glimpse of Chthon, and she did this knowing it would drive him insane, for anyone who witnesses Chthon in his true form, or even his realm, would be driven mad. Diabolique then went to another couple, and while staying with them, summoned a demon called the Whisper, aka the voice of Chthon, who told her all of Vicky Montesi's history. Blade then got a hold of the Demogorge page from the Darkhold and read it, summoning Chthon, who turned Blade into the new Demogorge, which is when Blade changed his name to Switchblade. It was then Louise Hastings who cast a reversal spell to return Switchblade's victims back to life, and in turn for doing this, a piece of Louise's soul was passed on to Chthon. And then, Mordred the Mystic once again had a confrontation with Chthon. The Elder God said he would give him his soul back in exchange for that of a woman from England, and when Mordred replied this woman was his medieval love, Lady Janice, he battled with the Elder God, who now had possession of Janice's body. So to save her, Mordred sacrificed himself to Chthon. Then the living vampire named Morbius read a page from the Darkhold next to resurrect his love, Martine Bancroft, and it worked. The one of Lilith's Lilith, Parasite, possessed Martine's body. Victoria Montesi was then trying to heal her roommate, a guy named Nash Salvato, and ended up releasing a demon called Monstrosity from the Darkhold. After a fight and a chase, she was able to banish Monstrosity. In Midnight Suns Unlimited 3, a guy named Brian Kornfeld read a page from the Darkhold. His wish was to fight crime, and so Chthon turned Brian into a creature called Spider X. Not long after that ordeal, dubbed the Midnight Massacre, that Vicky Montesi learned about her relationship to Chthon, who subsequently impregnated Vicky so that he could literally be reborn upon the earth. And upon learning of this, Doctor Strange took Vicky and put her in a stasis chamber while looking for a way to stop the birth, though Chthon was trying to use a demon called the Midwife to go to Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum to prepare the impregnated Vicky for Chthon's arrival. When the Midwife demon appeared in his sanctum, Strange went to Chthon's dimension to confront Chthon and nearly succumbed to the Elder God's dark power, but he held him off with a spell of faith. Chthon sent Doctor Strange back to Earth, where he used another spell, using Victoria's own goodness to drive Chthon out and back to his realm, where he remained for the next decade. In the Mystic Arcana series, Chthon sought to use a wizard named Ian McNee to reclaim Earth. Chthon posed as Oster and banished Ian McNee to the Serpent Sea in Set's realm, and then offered to save him if he'd bring Heckenut, the ancient Egyptian mystic, back to life. To do so, Ian embarked on his own quest for the cornerstone of creation artifacts. Chthon then sent Marie Laveau to help Ian on his quest, and he managed to get nearly all of the cornerstone objects except one, a mirror which he realized meant a mirror to Chthon's soul. That mirror was not a mirror, it was the Darkhold. Marie Laveau gave Ian the last Chronicle of Chthon page from the Darkhold, and after Ian succeeded in resurrecting Heckenot, fake Oster revealed himself as Chthon. Chthon threatened to take Ian's soul, so the protectors of each artifact, like Lyra the protector of the Serpent Crown, showed up to fight the Elder God and help Ian out. In turn, Ian was able to use the cornerstones to banish Chthon once more. In 2009, evil magic was spreading across the world, which temporarily killed many of the Avengers, Omega Flight, and even the Young Avengers. It turns out that Mordred the Mystic had captured High Evolutionaries Bova and stolen the Darkhold, which at this time was now in the supposedly secure custody of the Vatican. Wanda's brother Pietro, aka Quicksilver, was on his trail trying to stop him, but Mordred acquired the book and took it to the Darkhold, the chamber beneath Wundagore Mountain, and Mordred captured Quicksilver and began performing a ritual to graft the Darkhold spell to his body, and through this power channeling summoned Chthon, and Chthon then possessed the body of Quicksilver. The Elder God was able to use Quicksilver's speed to spread chaos around the earth, while the mighty Avengers kept trying to stop him. After chasing him unsuccessfully, they changed plans. The Avengers went and attacked Wundagore Mountain to draw Chthon to them. Amadeus Cho used an Ant-Man helmet to scramble the text so Chthon couldn't read his own spells, and he was rendered useless without them. Hulk and Stature then beat him up, ruining Quicksilver's body, and so Chthon passed his essence into Mordred the Mystic. But with the spells carved into Mordred's body, it caused him to once more be sucked in and bound to the Darkhold book, reversing all of the chaos that he had caused. And not long after this, Dr. Voodoo, using the scrying stones of Chthon to monitor the realm, although Nightmare ended up stealing them for a moment. It took Dr. Voodoo and Dr. Doom to stop Nightmare. Then, during an event called Fear Itself, when Cole Borson became the Serpent, Chthon was one of those gathered at the Devil's Advocacy, along with others like Blackheart, Despair, Dormammu, Sidorak, Satana, Shumagoroth, Asmodeus, Damballa, and many others. They wanted to figure out how to handle what the Serpent was doing on the surface of the planet. In 2016, FBI Special Agent Claire Dixon put together a special anti-carnage task force with Vicky Montesi from a new group called the Children of Midnight, or the Children of the Midnight Sun, recruiting the likes of Eddie Brock and Werewolf by Night. They linked up with a guy from an investment firm named Barry at one of Barry's mines to try to capture Carnage. Barry, it so happens, had found some ancient relics in one of his mine shafts and had sold them to the Darkholders cult. Gleason then brought Carnage to the Darkholders temple as the FBI task force followed on their trail. And the Darkhold said that Carnage, as the Red Slayer, was destined, prophesized to help them bring back an ancient evil to the world. Prophesized by Alfred the Mad Monk. That ancient evil was called He Who Sleeps, Chthon. And this in exchange for Carnage becoming immortal. But it turns out it was to be Carnage's blood that would awaken the Elder God, and though Carnage would die, his name would live on forever. There's always a twist. Instead, Carnage took the Darkhold and killed all of the Darkholders. In the ensuing fight, Barry Gleason made off with the book, though Agent Dixon managed to rip a page out of the book. Carnage stole the book from Gleason and headed deep out into wide open waters on the Indian Ocean. Then the Darkhold dwarf appeared to Carnage in Jakarta and warned him the Darkhold isn't used. At the end, it uses you. He then met up with a lady named Jubilee von Scotter, who then read the book and the map page found something called Tagangathon. That's a Lovecraftian word meaning sleep. So this was telling you where he who sleeps slumbers. Then the Chthonic Brotherhood captured Carnage for a moment before breaking loose and making them bring him to their altar for the bloodletting ceremony. Dixon put together a strike team and armed them with bullets etched with Chthonic symbols to try to weaken him since Sonics didn't work anymore. It turns out that the island with the altar was an ancient breeding ground for yet another race created from clay called the Broodlings of Chthon. That girl Van Scotto was also at this time now infected by a Darkhold corrupted symbiote at the same time that Dixon became a symbiote named Raze. And as Raze, she stole the Darkhold and brought it to Carnage. Inside the Temple of Chthon, the Red Slayer, Carnage, slew all of the cultists, the sacrifice to raise the Eldritch God from his dwelling below. And then at last, Chthon rose from his slumber. It was Van Scotto with the symbiotes on her body, transformed into a flying, armored, angelic symbiote with power that was able to stop Chthon, banishing him before he could summon other dark gods and destroy the earth. During the Sacred Empire event, Chthon was able to possess Scarlet Witch, and so she joined Hydra's Avengers, and it was Doctor Strange who was able to help Wanda break free of Chthon's influence. In Darkhold Alpha, the Scarlet Witch dreamed that the original Book of the Damned, the first Darkhold, not copies, were found in Abysmia deep beneath the USA, and it awakened Chthon to rise from the depths which cast the world into darkness and madness. But that would prove to be more precognitive than a mere dream. Dr. Doom, along with a power cosmic empowered Latverian named Zora, calling herself victorious, unearthed the true original Darkhold book. Having sensed this, Scarlet Witch immediately went to confront Victorious. She teamed up with Dr. Doom to go to Otherrealm to stop Chthon, and to do so she wanted to make a new Darkhold Defenders team by way of a divining spell. This team would be Iron Man, Blade, Wasp, Black Bolt, and Spider-Man. Doom went off to Otherrealm by himself and managed to come back, though barely alive. Wanda's team read from the book to become empowered by it, but they read a little bit too far, descending into madness, and they transformed from Darkhold Defenders to the Darkhold Defiled. The Darkhold Defiled then traveled to Otherrealm to battle Chthon and his demonic forces. Scarlet Witch and Dr. Doom confronted Chthon in his human form, and Scarlet Witch ended up absorbing the Darkhold and all of its power into her body, into herself, defeating Chthon, who lay on the floor of hell in a massive, half-transformed horror. And then she ate him, consuming his power, and she bound it to her own soul, and then chained Chthon up deep within her own essence, his new prison, as they all return to Earth. That's a wrap on this one, my friends. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be one of the first to know when I upload videos just like this every week. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.